one of the best lines of the movies, which is, Fredo, you're my older brother, and I love you, but don't ever take sides against the family again, ever. And so I wanted to communicate that to her. And so I made a few adjustments. I said, Dena, I love you. You're my wifey. But don't ever take sides against the family again, ever. And then Dena, and of course, for those of you who don't know Dena, she's a bit of a hothead. And so obviously we kind of get back and forth. I explained to her my thought process. She said, I didn't know that. Dena comes from a very rule-following family. And I come from a very Egyptian family, which means we believe in the rules, but more as guidelines. And so her thought process is, no, we should follow the rules. My thought process is, yes, we will, but we have to make a few adjustments. And so that was our first fight. We were, not communicating on the same page. She had a set of ideas that she was working under, and so did I. And I'll turn you over to Dena.
In my defense, this was like a weapon that he was trying to bring on the plane, and I was mortified, so.
Dena, not in front of the children.
We're just gonna get off the mics. It's okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay, so that was a nice little introduction. I'm going to further introduce communication, just to briefly define it. This is, again, the Webster definition. A process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. Communication in terms of relationships and marriage, it's being able to discuss everything. It's being able to discuss your triumphs, your joys, your happy memories, the memories that you make with your partner, observations, needs, expectations, your pet peeves, your shortcomings, your weaknesses, your fears, everything. Communication involves all of that. But there are levels to communication, and that's what we're kind of going to go through today. We're going to try and actually, because we don't have a whole lot of time, and this is by no means an exhaustive delve into communication, but we're going to try and explain what effective communication is. And that digs deeper into needs and expectations, and that's where people have the most trouble relaying those messages to each other. So with a primary focus on needs and expectations. And if you can master the art of communication, you will have, by far, a much more meaningful, a much deeper relationship. But it comes at a cost, and we're going to go into what kind of cost that is. But let's discussing needs, communicating needs. And a significant part of a healthy relationship is being able to communicate our needs. A really good resource for communicating needs and understanding what our own personal needs are is this book by Gary Chapman. It's called The 5 Love Languages. I'm sure you guys have heard of it or maybe discussed it amongst yourselves if you haven't read it yourselves. If you haven't read it, I encourage all of you guys to read it. It is a game changer as far as how you communicate in a relationship setting. So quickly, the premise of the book is that there are 5 love languages that people, it's how they express and how they receive love. And this is how we communicate our love to each other. Those 5 love languages are typically, in no particular order, this is just the order that I remembered them in, gifts. So people who enjoy giving or receiving gifts as an expression of love, because maybe it makes, you think of that person, or you think of something caught your eye that made them think of you or whatever, or you thought of them and you decide to give them a gift or receive a gift. This is how you either like to give or like to receive love. I should go on to say that usually the way that we like to receive love is how we like to give love, which can be a little problematic in relationships, which is kind of We learned that the hard way. We ended up having to read this book because of that situation. And I discovered, through this book and through the little quiz that comes with this book that tells you what your own personal love languages are, you learn a lot about yourself. So I personally, I'll tell you what mine are when we get to there, and I'll tell you what Robert's are. Or he can tell you if you want. Acts of service. This is a Robert love language. I'll just tell them. Acts of service is...
For those of you who want to show me love, pay attention.
So this can go beyond romantic love, but, for the purposes of today's talk, we're talking about romantic love, or love between a spouse or a potential spouse. Acts of service, so people who like to serve or be served in a, not in a slave-like setting, but if I want to show you that, if I want to show Robert that I love him, I'll prepare his tea for him, or I'll make his lunch, or I'll go grab something for him, or I'll make sure, if I know he's coming home, I'll make sure to have things ready for him, because this is how he appreciates, being loved. This is how he feels that I'm being attentive to him. For me, on the other hand, I am the opposite. I like to do everything myself, and I don't like to ask for help. I'm not one of those people. So this would not be one of my 5 love languages. So even if Robert tries to help me out in something, in my mind, it's always like, I can probably do it better. So let me just do it, and then I'll do it. And I feel like typically a lot of women are like that, but this is not a...
Guys, we're happily married.
We're being very real with you guys. So words of affirmation is the 3rd love language. This is one of my love languages. I like to hear that I'm being appreciated. And this is, and people who tend to like to hear that they're being appreciated, or that, or when they do something different that somebody notices, or that they that tend to do those things for others. So I would like to say that I tend to be the more encouraging type, therefore I like to receive encouragement and, positive affirmation in return. Number 4 is quality time. This is, again, this is one of my love languages. I like to spend quality time with Robert and with my kids and my family and, with friends even. This can go beyond, relationships or romantic relationships. But quality time is, spending time with each other, making time out and carving time out, going through the effort of carving time out to spend real time together, not just distracted time or not just, time in big groups. It's intimate quality time. And number 5, physical touch. This is self-explanatory. This happens to be another one of Robert's love languages. And it's funny because it's definitely not one of mine, and I like my personal space, and we get into arguments about this all the time. And it's actually carried on through my kids, and my kids love to hug and cuddle and stuff, and sometimes I just need my space, and it's okay. I'm learning to give love like that. Anyway, physical touch. This one I want to just hone in on just a little bit, because physical touch, for the sake of, most of us here are not married or not married yet. You might be in relationships, and physical touch is definitely a love language that, for those of us who love physical touch and appreciate physical touch, and this is our love language, it can be a struggle not to push boundaries. And I'm sure Cindy and George next week will talk about boundaries with you guys. But, for those of us who struggle with physical touch, as in that being one of their love languages, you have to set clearer boundaries when giving and receiving love prior to marriage. So going from, let me hand it to Robert, actually.
I'm going to use the microphone stand. Oh, that's okay. Before we move on, when you're still courting or engaged and you're talking about the 5 love languages, be careful of the standard that you set. Because let's say, for example, you were with someone that likes getting gifts and you surprise them all the time. We know of a couple that they would get so many, she would get so many surprises that when she would go home, They were married now, she's by herself in her house, and she would go into the bathroom, she would have to close the bathroom thinking at any moment everybody's gonna jump out and surprise her. So, yeah, be careful of the standard you set, otherwise it could be, it could be too much. Anyways, what prevents us from having or from communicating effectively, okay? So there's three main things. Obviously there are lots of things, but we're gonna discuss three main ones. The first is baggage. I don't think I really have to define that for you guys. Everyone kind of knows what that is. That's basically emotional baggage or emotional issues that you come into the relationship with. That means these are emotional issues that you didn't develop because of the relationship. No, you're bringing them to the relationship. And this is part of the reason why a lot of us will tell you do not date at a young age, because every time you date, you're basically, you're packing some luggage, okay? You're not going into that relationship and then leaving scot-free. No, every time you go in, you're bringing something out with you. So the longer that you can wait until you can date effectively, or date for the purpose of getting married, or as Peter and Tina called it, courtship instead of dating, the healthier it's going to be, or the easier that it's going to be for you when you do find that someone that you want to spend, your life with. And so here, when I say deficiencies, what I'm saying is, ideally, the ideal set of parents are going to give their children or meet all of their children's emotional needs, while at the same time being able to discipline them exactly right, being able to affirm them exactly right, everything perfect, right? Unfortunately, as much as our parents try to do their best, they're not perfect. And as much as you're going to try to do your best when you're parents, you're not perfect. There's always going to be some sort of emotional deficiency that we're going to have because of the way that we were raised, and because of our own personalities. That also factors into it. And so with that being said, you're going to go in and you're going to have some emotional needs, right? And if those needs are not met, if you have an excess of, let's say, a particular deficiency, for example, a lot of times, especially in our culture, fathers will not affirm their sons, or will not spend enough time with their sons, will not help their sons become men. Okay? They'll give them money and they'll criticize them. They do a good job of that, but affirming them, it's not easy, or it's not something that they were raised with. So a lot of times they don't do that with their own sons, or mothers that are hypercritical of their children. Okay, and so when you come out of a home like that and you go into a relationship, you bring a lot of that with you. And another thing that we see commonly that we didn't see as much maybe in Egypt is when our parents immigrated from Egypt, sometimes they had to work full-time jobs, sometimes 2 jobs, in order to make ends meet, which doesn't leave a lot of time for parenting. And so when that happens, yeah, you're gonna have some emotional needs that weren't met by the parent, okay? So these deficiencies will leave us looking for fulfillment of those needs in the wrong place. So another way to look at sin is an unhealthy manifestation of a healthy desire. What do I mean by that? So let's take, for example, sexual desire. Sexual desire is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And a healthy manifestation of it happens within the confines of marriage. An unhealthy manifestation happens either when you fall into something called fornication or adultery. Do you know what the difference between the two is? Fornication and adultery. Fornication is when you engage in sexual activity before marriage. Adultery is after, okay? Another example would be hunger. Hunger is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Our bodies need it. And so a healthy manifestation of that is eating what you need to sustain life. An unhealthy manifestation of that is gluttony, right? Anger. It's good to have a little bit of anger. And the reason why, what we call righteous anger, so let's say, for example, I see that someone's taking advantage of a friend of mine, or there's injustice that's happening to someone that I know, or even someone that I don't know. It's good to be able to stand up and have courage and say, that's not right, and you're indignant about that, and that's good anger, right? And then, obviously, the unhealthy manifestation of that is rage or violence. And the next thing that can really give us quite a bit of baggage is trauma. whether that is physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. We all know people that have gone through things like that. I remember when I was in health class, there was a young lady, a girl, who was sitting next to me. And before class started, one time we're talking, and she just, I don't know what, I don't remember what we were talking about, but she said, I'm never getting married. Or no. She said, I'm never having children. And I said, why? She said, when I turn 18, I'm getting my tubes tied so I can never have children. I said, okay, that's a really drastic decision to make when you're 15, 16. And so I asked her why. And she said, because my parents got divorced and I never want to have children, put them through that again. So that was obviously a very traumatic situation for that poor young girl that affected her idea of the potential of what can happen in a marriage, especially in divorce and situations, etc. So all of these things can negatively affect us, and we bring all of these to the relationships that we get into. So it's always good to keep in mind that when I go into a relationship, I'm not coming in like everything's fine, scot-free. No, everybody's coming in with some sort of baggage, some more than others. Next is differences in upbringing. Okay, this can get in the way of things as well. We're all raised differently, and so an example of that, where that can get in the way. So let's say, for example, I'll give you an example of two different people. There's homes that console their children when, let's say, for example, a child falls, hurts himself or hurts herself, and mama comes and tatab ali, it's okay, habibi, ma tazalsh, where does it hurt? Let me wash it for you, let me put on a Band-Aid. And then there's the family that gives them a smack on the butt, walk it off, you're fine, don't worry. And, what are you crying about? Etc. And so those children that did not receive any consolation, when they grow up, they've learned essentially to pacify themselves. And so when they marry somebody who was consoled, and then all of a sudden there's a fight or something that hurt that other person's feelings, and they look at them like, what's wrong with you? Are you acting like a baby? Get over it, walk it off. Just give a smack on the butt. It doesn't work that way. And so because we're raised differently, you're naturally going to handle difficulties or situations. You're going to look at the information that's being handed to you. You're going to process it, and sometimes in completely different ways. Expected action. This goes back to the story that I shared with you in the beginning about our first fight when we were trying to take that, or when I was trying to take that Fijian War Club on the plane. I expected Dena to behave in a specific way, and she expected me to behave in a specific way. And in our minds, the expectation is there's only one way to behave. There's the reason why I don't have to communicate this to you is because there's no other way for you to understand this information. We have to take this thing on the plane with us, or at least get it, in fragile. And she's like, no, we have to follow the rules. The reality is, lots of times, there's so many different ways, but again, because we've all been raised in the same house, like with our siblings, etc., and then we come out, our siblings think like we do a lot of times, even if we're very different, but the thought process is very similar. And so the whole time you've been dealing with your siblings, and you're a lot of times you see eye to eye in terms of how you handle certain situations. But now you have to deal with someone who wasn't raised in the same house as you. And then all of a sudden they're processing information in a completely different way. And you're like, why would I have to explain that to you? It's very clear, when in reality, it's not. Okay? Very, very different. The way we're raised affects us and affects the way that we process information very deeply. The last is going to be, and this is most obvious when we're raising and disciplining our children. And this is going to be the differences in upbringing when we raise our children and discipline our children. So let's say, for example, we have parent A and parent B. Parent A grew up in a home that was very disciplined, okay? We do our homework from this time to this time. We wake up from this time to this time. If you don't follow the rules, there's going to be a punishment. You're grounded, this and that. Person B is going to grow up in a home where, hey, you know what? It's okay. You didn't do your homework? Malish. Next time, try harder. Okay? You didn't feel like going to church? That's okay. We'll go next week. And so that laissez-faire approach to parenting versus a very disciplined approach to parenting. When it comes now time, they might have figured out how to deal with each other, but now when it comes time to have children, and it comes time to discipline the children, you're gonna have the parent that was disciplined very firmly. They're gonna wanna apply that to their children, and then you're gonna have the person just being, what's the big deal? They just, started a fire at school, they didn't mean to. And this is where you get, obviously, into disagreements and into fights. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind, and you're gonna have to establish where do we as a family, what do we want for our children in terms of what we want as far as discipline, in terms of what we want and communication, even with our own children, because that's gonna be something that you're gonna have to figure out. Finally, unmet expectations. Unmet expectations is when it explains itself, when I have certain expectations and they're not being met. This is just a simple flow chart, and this can get in the way of effective communication. So if I have unmet expectations, and then I have unsettled feelings, because now I have expectations that weren't met, now I get upset. If I get upset, my feelings are hurt, and now one of two things is gonna happen. I'm either gonna communicate those feelings, or I'm gonna not communicate those feelings. If I communicate those feelings, there's gonna be maybe a little bit of a fight, but in the end, you're gonna reach some sort of resolution. Okay? If I don't communicate those feelings, that leads to resentment. If I start to have resentment, a lot of times that'll manifest in a host of bad behaviors. And this is where people start to look outside the marriage. They start to basically treat each other mean, start sleeping in different bedrooms, etc. This is the host of bad behaviors that we're talking about.
Okay. So, the host of bad behaviors, chief among, I would say, is anger. Anger can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, and it's important to recognize our tendencies toward anger, whether we're quick-tempered, quick to anger, slow to anger, type of person that can diffuse a situation. It's really important to really get a solid understanding of who we are before we enter into a relationship, because once you're in that relationship, it's going to be very clear very fast what kind of person you are. And if you're being flung into a situation where you don't know how to react because you haven't figured out that maybe I have a tendency to anger or a tendency to bad behaviors, then it's going to escalate a lot more quickly, and it's going to damage and ultimately ruin your relationship. So that's why we need to kind of nip these things in the bud. I want to turn to a biblical example, actually, of Nabal, Abigail, and David as examples of anger and diffusion of anger. For you guys who don't know the story, this is in 1 Samuel chapter 25. And then we are introduced to Nabal and Abigail. They're a married couple in verse 3. And in verse 3, just to read it really quick, the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. So we understand from the Bible that Abigail was a woman of good understanding, and Nabal was harsh and evil in his doings. Basically, the story, real quick, of Nabal and how he comes to meet David. David had his men, his troops or whatever. They were out in the field, and they were offering security basically to Nabal, who was a shepherd. He had lots of sheep. He was like a shepherd and a farmer, and so he had lots of provisions. And David was camped out there, and so his men were offering basically Nabal security for free. And so when it came time for the harvest, and Nabal was shearing his sheep, and time for the harvest, David asked him for some of the provisions because for his men, because they had been, guarding Nabal's sheep and his farm, and all of for essentially for free. But Nabal, being a man of evil and harshness, was like, "Who is David? Who is this David? And who is this son of Jesse? I don't need to give him anything." And Abigail, hearing that Nabal rejected David's offer, and David actually trying to avenge himself. So David, hearing that Nabal rejected, the request that David made, David came and was ready, girded his soldiers with swords, 400 of them, and they were on their way to go basically slaughter Nabal and his family, and his whole little tribe, or his family. Anyway, Nabal, our Abigail, wanting to diffuse the situation because she was a woman of good understanding, she heard that this was going to happen, and she went out to meet David on the way. And she had brought with her all these provisions, so wheat and fruit and food and whatever, and sheep and blah, 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 all the provisions that David had wanted. And basically went and did a matanya in front of him and said, "My Lord, please forgive him. He's a man of folly. He doesn't know what he's doing. And it is beneath you, my Lord, to kill a man in the heat of your anger," basically. And so Abigail diffused the situation, and David was so impressed by Abigail because she helped him come to his senses. And he said in verse 33, "And blessed is your conduct, and blessed are you, because today you kept me from coming to bloodshed." Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. From coming to bloodshed. Anyway, so we see here that Abigail is a diffuser of situations. She can temper the anger of both her husband and David. And it turns out a week later, if you guys want to know the rest of the story, if you don't know it already, that Nabal dies, and then David hears about it, and David takes Abigail for his wife. So, anyway, so this is just a biblical example of anger being flared up and the wisdom that it takes to diffuse anger, and how it could actually not only saved a relationship or created a new one, it also saved a whole little village. We also see in Numbers that there are cities of refuge. Cities of refuge were in the Old Testament where it was an eye for an eye. Whenever someone killed somebody, they had to die. But there were times in God's mercy where, when God said, "No, we need to build these cities of refuge for people who accidentally, kill a man by accident, and then they can go to these cities of refuge that are going to be set up, and they can stay, so that by the time the family of the murdered person, diffuses their anger and their passions are kind of settled, maybe they'll reconsider killing the person, and they cannot be killed in those cities of refuge. There will be a trial, and it'll work out in a kind of a more diplomatic way to see if this man needs to be killed. But there was wisdom in the sense that, it's important for us to settle our emotions, to take some time before provoking any kind of action. So, as you can see, there are two types of people. There are two types of people, two types of people. Those that want to discuss things right away, and those that need a cool-off period. And I will tell you that I'm the kind of person that I want to discuss things and resolve right away so that we can move on and we can just, just move on to the next chapter. Whereas Robert, my loving husband, likes to cool off and can cool off for, however long he needs. And here I say, whenever we get into an argument, it's like, I've got to wait for him to cool off so that he doesn't say anything that he might regret later, or do something he might regret. Not that he would. Like I said, we're, in a loving marriage. But it's just the two different types of personalities where I would like to resolve. He wants to cool off, and he knows that about himself, which I actually respect very highly, because if he didn't cool off, if he didn't have this cooling off period, our arguments would be far worse. Our fights would be more tumultuous, then it wouldn't be good for the relationship. So there's always kind of a little yin and yang, I think, and it's important to have a little bit of harmony, I guess, between the two types of personalities. Effective arguing. So instead of when we are quick to anger, when we're in the middle of a dispute, we can say things that are regretful in the heat of our passion. What I found in my reading is that there is a tip by, if any of you are familiar with Jordan Peterson, whom I'm a big fan of, but in his book, 12 Rules for Life, which I highly recommend, it kind of doesn't have to do with relationships, it doesn't have to do with anything. He's a secular, like thinker, but clinical psychologist, but he's very wise. He, in his understanding of psychology in his own personal marriage, practices this, and I really, really love this. It's to take the two of you and separate for a little bit to diffuse the situation. And you say, what have I done? And you think about this, and you say, what have I done to contribute to the situation we are arguing about? However small, however distant, I made an error. Reunite, come back, and start with the words, here's how I was wrong. So it almost takes you back into the perspective of, what did I do wrong? What did I contribute to the mess that we're in? And this is such an effective way to argue, because it is all about effectively and humbly putting yourself and making yourself having to correct yourself. Because usually in an argument, it's not one person that's wrong. It's usually two people mess up, or there was some sort of miscommunication. And if it gets to a point where it's pretty bad, this is a really excellent way to come to terms and to reconcile. Sure.
I just want to add one thing. Another nice little tip when you're, let's say, for example, you have a dispute or whatever. If you start with the words, or if you use the words, well, you did this, or you said this, that doesn't get you very far. But if you start with, I felt when I heard this statement, I felt this way. That works a lot better, because then you're not really saying you did something to me. You're saying these are my feelings about what I heard. Okay, whether that was your intention or not, that's completely different. But the reality is, I can't change how I felt about what happened. And so instead of trying to go with, okay, well, let's talk about what happened. You said this and this and that, and then automatically that says, well, but you said this and you did this, and then that causes the escalation to happen. But if you start with, I felt this way during the fight, and I felt, etc., or X, Y, and Z, and the other person says, well, I felt this way, you can usually come to an agreement or a resolution a lot faster and a lot calmer than you would have the other way.
I agree with everything you said. Okay. So that was anger. And that's kind of discussing anger, because you will at times get angry in your relationship. But anger, what we know of anger, is that anger is actually a manifestation of sadness. And this is a cute little picture of Robert and I. You can tell that Robert, Robert's angry. He's all the usual self. And here I am sad that he's angry. Just kidding. Obviously. Anger is an emotion that conveys power. And it's funny because if you guys have seen this movie, it's like amazing Inside Out. It's such a good movie, and it really hits home what emotions do and how we react to certain situations. And but what we know about anger is an emotion that conveys power. So if you're angry and you're louder, for example, you have more power in this fight. That's the thinking, at least. And that sadness is an emotion that conveys weakness. However, anger is just a power play. It's a manifestation of sadness or of some sort of grief, an underlying grief that has yet to be communicated. But let me tell you, conveying sadness and hurt feelings will do more and be more effective in your relationship to help resolve a dispute versus anger. When you can communicate in a calm way and in a way that just reflects the actual sadness, the underlying sadness that's beyond the anger, then you can actually focus on the words and actually truly communicate. Whereas with anger, a lot of times we are distracted by maybe the raised voices or the yelling that occurs, or the tone, or anger is just a power play. And if it becomes a struggle for power within the relationship, then you have a lot more on your hands than just the issue at hand. And in order to properly express sadness and hurt feelings, a prerequisite is being vulnerable. And so vulnerability, and this is kind of as we get into more deeper forms of communication, we're going to discuss vulnerability. And vulnerability is by far the key to deeper communication. And as you can see, communication, what we've been talking about this, so far, it's not just, where are we going for lunch, or, how many kids do you want to have, or what are we going to do tomorrow, or, those are cute and fun questions, and those are types of communication, but that's more planning. What we're talking about for the purposes of this talk and for the purpose of effective communication is expressing our vulnerabilities, our experiences, and our needs. And those are the things that really, really unite us to the other person, is sharing those sometimes hard and difficult conversations. And that's where vulnerability comes in. Vulnerability is the openness and courage to express feelings, weaknesses, and habits. So vulnerability comes with a lot of having to discuss a lot of hard things. And it's also the first thing that I seek from others, the first thing I want from you, but the last thing I want to give of myself. So if I want a relationship, if I want to be in a relationship, I found somebody that I really like, and I really truly want to be with them, and maybe this could be the person that I want to marry. What do I want from them? I want them to open up to me. I want to know all about them. I want to know where they come from, what their baggage is, how many relationships they've had, who their role models are. I want to know everything. But am I so quick to share that information? Do I want to share that baggage with this person? Probably not. Especially if I'm someone who has my walls up, who's really guarded, by virtue of all the baggage that they come with. And I'm not saying that to point anybody out, but we all have baggage. Everybody carries a load of baggage into any relationship that they're in. And so it's something to be cognizant of, is knowing that this is going to be hard for me, but I expect this of them. And so it's only fair that I'm willing to give that of myself also. And experiences. So how experiences in general in your life have affected you and how they made you feel. So traumas, triumphs, milestones, etc. All those are important to express to a person that you're in a serious relationship with, because like we said in the baggage portion of the conversation, like all of that will affect your relationship in some way, shape, or form. And let me let me end this slide with wisdom, with a point of wisdom. There is wisdom in how much you expose of yourself to who you're with. Not every relationship works out. Not every relationship that you're in, no matter how meaningful or how deep you might be in, is going to come through to the other side and result in marriage. And so you have to be very wary of how much you are willing to share with that person prior to marriage. And God willing, we all find somebody that this is the person that we're going to marry. In a perfect world, we're going to be with one person, and this person is going to know us, and like inside and out, and we're going to know them, and we're going to fall in love, we're going to get married, and it'll be just the one person. But usually that's not the case, especially in this day and age. And so you have to be very careful how much of yourself you want to share with this person, because not only can that damage a relationship, like especially early on, like if you're sharing too much early on, but it can really hurt you, knowing that there are people out there who know your deepest, darkest secrets, and now they're not committed to you anymore. And unfortunately, we see that happen all too often. So be very careful, use wisdom, and this is when I would, I know Peter and Tina in their talk, they talked about, using a father of confession or an older servant, or, someone who's older than you that has wisdom that can guide you into how much you share about yourself to certain people. There is an appropriate time and a place to share certain things with the people that we're in relationships with. Okay? Yes.
All right, I'm just going to add that a red flag is if you're vulnerable with someone and you notice that they're not being vulnerable with you, that's a red flag. That there should be, it's a two-way street. Okay? So again, you still shouldn't, even, let's say, for example, you go on a first date of getting to know each other and this person's super vulnerable with you, that doesn't mean that you should be vulnerable too. That's a bad idea. That's your first date. You're still getting to know each other. You have to have some wisdom of when to do it, but then when the right time comes and you're being vulnerable and this person is not doing the same, you should be wondering what's going on, why are there walls, what's happening, and you can be blunt and ask, hey, I've shared quite a bit with you, but I noticed that's not reciprocated. Why is that? And I think you have to be honest. You have to ask. Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed. And if they say, oh, you're just too weird, I'm going to leave, you dodged a bullet.
And also, try not to don't be a Debbie Downer. Sorry, nothing against anybody named Debbie. But don't be a downer on your first date, just so you guys know. It's usually not a good thing to just lay it all out, all your relationships, prior experiences, and, I was abused as a child, like on your first date. It's usually not gonna get you very far, so just a hint, just a tip. Okay. And then going even further into the communication, going even deeper into vulnerability and deeper, difficult discussions. At some point, if you are ready to get married and you found somebody, you're going to have a very open and sobering, no pun intended, conversation about addiction. Thanks, Peter. He laughed at my joke. Addictions. Anything. Well, a lot of us, I would say, deal with some sort of addiction in some way, shape, or form. And that is going to 100% come, face to face with your relationship at some point, and it's going to affect your relationship at some point, no matter how benign you think this addiction is. It's going to affect your interpersonal relationship with each other. And I'm talking about every addiction from pornography, sexual addiction, gambling, drinking, drugs, both illicit drugs and prescription medications, even addiction to social media. If you're someone who posts all the time and you're with somebody who's a little bit more private, that is going to affect the relationship. Video games is actually one of those benign, addictions that will absolutely affect a relationship. I'll have to tell you about the one time I took Robert to Costco. He never comes to Costco with me. And I regrettably took him one time, and it's because he decided, this was early on, and he found an Xbox at Costco that he wanted to buy. This was early on in our relationship, in our marriage. I think I had just had Aaron, who's 11 years old now, so this must have been 11 years ago. And we went to Costco, we were just going for groceries, and he was like, I really need to get an Xbox. And I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Keep in mind, Robert's a veterinarian. He has to go to sleep early so he can wake up in the morning and do surgeries and things like that. And he would stay up on this Xbox till like 3 a.m. playing.
Shout out to Joe Ragib and Abuna Dan, we would play together.
Yeah. And so I was like, what is going on? Robert has a little tendency to, game a little bit. And this is funny because I'm going to put you on blast right now.
Okay.
It's too late. But I would let him go to sleep early when we had just had our first kid, so he wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night to feed the baby, okay? Because he needed to sleep. But he could stay up till 3 a.m. to play Xbox. So it was basically a week or two of this. And we decided it was better for our relationship and our marriage that we returned the Xbox. Thank God, Costco has a good return policy. But like I said,
Guys, let me know when they have PS5s.
like I said, addictions truly affect relationships, and it was becoming a problem. And so, and on a serious note, addictions always, no matter how much you try to hide an addiction, the thing is, when you are in a relationship with somebody and you marry somebody, you cannot escape them. So no matter how much you try to hide something, you live with this person. You are going to be in their face 24/7. Whether or not, yes, you guys work and you have your separate time during the day, but at the end of the day, you guys go home and you see each other and you live with this person day in and day out, and you cannot hide anything any longer. And so disclosing these addictions and treating these addictions early on and trying to get over these addictions before you get into marriage is key. You're also going to have to be willing, as a married couple, to disclose your passwords and your accounts. So including other dating accounts, for example, or, like, let's say I found somebody on some dating app, which is okay, people do it all the time now. But if you find somebody on a dating app, that dating app better be deleted, and all your other dating apps if you are in a relationship with somebody. And so you have to disclose these things. And if you are not ready to be full transparency, full disclosure with somebody, then you're not ready to get married, because these things will come back to haunt you. You will not be able to hide a double identity forever. You need to be okay with location tracking, because you better believe that we have, especially women, we have these Egyptian women anxiety genes, and I need to know where my husband is at all times. And so, and likewise, it's important to be able to know where your spouse is, and this is a form of accountability. So if you're not ready for full disclosure, you're not ready for a serious relationship. And if you are trying to keep it from yourself, if you're trying to hide those things, if you're trying to say, I don't need to give up that privacy, I don't need to give up, this is my life, that's not the way marriage works, especially not in the Christian sense of marriage. And so if you have that mentality, you are not ready for the Christian sense of marriage, the Christian understanding of marriage. And if you are not ready to give that step up, that's a big red flag. So you need to look within yourself. And if you're in a relationship with somebody that won't disclose those things, and there's a fine line too, because not all these things you have to give up prior to marriage. But there are certain things that you should know about prior to marriage, because marriage is permanent. Marriage you can't get out of. So obviously talk to your father of confession, or and talk to somebody who's wiser and older than you that can guide you if you're facing these things in your relationship. Also, joint bank accounts. You guys, once you're married, your money is no longer your money, it's our money. You are one unit, you're one person. So if you're hiding things with separate side accounts, things like that, red flag. The beauty of marriage is that you are completely and holistically vulnerable to this person. And this person is someone that you made a commitment to, and they've made a commitment to you, that no matter what ugly underlying issue you have, that they won't run away. There's a safety and a security there, and like a peace that is granted. That's part of the sacrament of marriage that binds you together, and you can feel safe with this person no matter what you uncover, and that no matter what happens, no matter what issue is underlying there, that the beauty that they won't run away, and that they won't go away, and that they'll work on the marriage with you is a beautiful thing. And that's a commitment that you have to make with that person prior to getting married. Because if they're not willing to do that with you, then they're not worth marrying. Okay?
All right, a lot of you got really happy when you saw conclusion, but it's the longest slide, so enjoy. Okay, but we'll go through it quickly. So the first thing is Peter and Tina kind of touched on this during their talk, which is a partner to complete me. And all of you guys, say that. I'm looking for someone to complete me. And yes, that means you're looking for someone to kind of pick up the slack where you have deficiencies. But at the same time, in the Christian understanding of marriage, you're also looking to, your spouse is going to be the best person that will point out to you your deficiencies, not so that they can pick up the slack, but so that you can correct your deficiencies. And so when you say someone to complete me, yes, and help where my deficiencies are, but also help me complete my deficiencies, fill in my deficiencies. And as Dena was saying, because the way that marriage works, it's unlike any other relationship that you will be in. It's unlike any friendship that you have, even your best and closest friends. Abun is a true gentleman. Okay, so you're going to be able to hide things from a lot of people, but you are not going to be able to hide them from your wife, or you're not going to be able to hide them from your husband. And so they're going to have an innate ability, a God-given ability, to be able to point that out and say, that's wrong, that needs to be fixed. And you're going to have to be able to say, yes, that is wrong, and yes, that needs to be fixed. And by God's grace, I'm going to fix it. That's where really the work of the Holy Spirit comes in. Because it's we can strive to stop sinning, and through confession, repentance, and that helps. But to really make us the person that we're meant to be, this is really where the work of the Holy Spirit comes in. And we believe that, and it is because it happens as a sacrament within the church, you're given that extra ability by the Holy Spirit to help. So don't expect that you're going to go in, because a lot of times, I'm sure Peter and Tina will say this too, and Dena, and I hear this all the time, well, I'm working on myself so I can be the person that I need to be when I get married. As if, like, when I get married, I'm going to be complete. The reality is, you're going to think that you're complete. You're going to go in, and then all of a sudden, your spouse is going to sit there and just poke holes through all your deficiencies. Everything that you've worked on, you're going to find, like, either you've never addressed that issue, or you didn't even know that it existed, or, they find other ones, whatever. But the point is, this is the purpose for marriage. It makes us better people. Men need women. We need their femininity. We need their gentleness. We need their soft touch, right? And women need men. They need our masculinity. They need our most of the time. Some of us are a little more emotional, but they need our reason. But that doesn't mean that the opposite isn't true. Of course, it can be true, but as a general. Okay, so a partner to complete me doesn't necessarily mean just to pick up the slack. It also means to help me fill in my own gaps. Okay, puzzle pieces. When we first got married, my dad had this conversation with Dena and said, "Look, man and a wife are like two jigsaw puzzle pieces that don't fit together." And he said, but over time, you like bang them together, you try to make them fit, and eventually what happens, pieces fall off until they can fit together and new pieces grow in. And then till, as the time goes on, they're gonna be a perfect fit for each other. And it was interesting because a few days ago, I was listening to Jordan Peterson give some marriage advice to a couple, and he was saying, it's okay for you guys to fight often. As long as you make up. And these fights, what's happening is you're fighting because either duties are not being met, or there are certain needs that are not being met. And what happens is every time you make up, you come back, and then that's when you have negotiation of, okay, well, this needs to be done. Who's going to do this? And this is where you have a negotiation of distributing each person's responsibilities and their duties. And so he says, it's okay to fight, but what ends up happening over time is the fights will become further and further apart, and less, they're not as strong each time. They're weaker, smaller fights. And so it's okay if you have fights. It's okay as long as you make up, and as long as you're able to have resolution, you have a negotiation. Now, if your personality is like mine, where you give in so easily, and you don't put up much of a fight, and you're kind of like a pushover. And so what ends up happening is you're willing a lot of times to take on more responsibility than you actually should. And so you have to think in that case, if you have an agreeable personality, okay, I'm gonna be doing this every day for the rest of my life, essentially. Am I willing to do that? So if you have an agreeable personality, you have to frame it to yourself in that way. You can't frame it to yourself, can I do it? Yes, you can, but do you want to do it that often for the rest of your life? And you have to, kind of weigh out the costs and see if it's worth it. The third story that I have for you is a gift that we got from one of my dad's close friends. He was a friend of his from Egypt. And he came to our wedding and he gave us a wedding card. And inside of it was a $100 bill that was torn in half. And he wrote in there, just as each half by itself is worthless, so each person within the relationship by themselves is not worth as much. And so we complete each other together. It's not that you're worthless without the other person, but you're worth so much more when you're together and when you're in a good and happy and blessed marriage. What did I do with the $100? I invested it, Phil. It is in an Xbox. All right. All right, the last point. We have to calculate the cost. So almost all of you that are in this room you haven't committed to the person, okay, that you're speaking with, or if you haven't met someone, you're still not fully committed. So what do I mean by calculating the cost? So when Christ was speaking to his disciples, he said to them, "For which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or a king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he's able with 10,000 to meet him who comes at him with 20,000. Or else while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. Likewise, whoever does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple." What does this have to do with marriage? Right now, you're not committed to anything. You have to, any partner that you're talking to, you have to look and you have to calculate the cost. Is this person worth the investment? And I can't tell you yes or no, obviously that differs from person to person. But if the answer is yes, and you get married, then you have to forsake anything that you have in your life that you're holding to be more dear than that person, and that is your spouse for the rest of your life, no matter what happens. One of the conversations that Dena and I had early on, and she thought it was really weird, was divorce is not an option. It's just not, no matter what happens. I don't care what happens, it's just not an option. And if that is on the table from the beginning, then you know that no matter what happens, this person's not going to. You can be more honest with that person. But if it is an option, well, then at some point, if they find something out that they really don't like, then guess what? They might leave. But if it's not an option, we could be as honest as we will be once you get married again. That is your spouse. Right after I got married, my dad had this conversation with me where he said, you have to look at your wife and you have to think, this is the person that God chose for me. No matter what happens, she's the person God wants me to be. No matter what happens. And that's it. There's no way around it. There's no like, yeah, but we fell out of love. We grew apart. All this stuff that we hear. No, it just doesn't work that way. Glory. Okay. Do we have questions? All right. Thanks, Vito.
so while we get the questions ready, we're going to try to filter through, get them all arranged and stuff. I also want to add one point about communication. It's actually, I think, one that we kind of overlooked, and I think it was one that you guys alluded to. One of the biggest things about communication is, so usually when we think about communicating, we usually think about talking, right? Right? How I can talk to someone. One of the biggest things that you'll find actually is not just talking, is our listening, right? There's something called hearing, and there's something called active listening, right? Listening to someone. What's the difference? Sylvie, what's the difference?
Hearing, you're just like passively listening to them, you're not really saying anything.
Yeah.
Actively listening, you're making them feel heard by saying what they said back to them.
So saying what they said back to them. What else? So let's say, I'm going to give you an example, Sylvie. Ready? So let's say you said, is something wrong, right? Right? And I just say, no. No. Or I can say, no, nothing's wrong. Why would you say that, right? Or I could say, no, I'm okay, right? And then somebody will be like, oh, okay, right? She said no. So that's what she means. Is that always true? But she said no, or he said no. What should I do then? Ask again? Robert. That's a good answer. Yeah, so part of understanding what someone says is knowing the person, right? Which goes back to that love language part, right? And even myself, right? Because sometimes, you could say, oh, I don't want to reveal what I'm feeling, so I will say no, right? But knowing yourself and knowing that person, you can get a good idea of what they're really trying to say despite the words, right? Go past the words. The other part of that is, on the other side, is the vulnerability part, right? And it's so important that you trust the person that's in front of you to be able to share what's inside. Because if you can't get past that, right, then you're putting a boundary between, or not even a boundary, you're putting a block between you and that person. And that doesn't work in relationships. It doesn't work in marriage. If you're just holding back all the time, then how are you connecting? So we have to be able to share with each other. You have to be able to put yourself aside and share with it, even sometimes when you really don't want to. And sometimes that means, you know what, I'm just not in a good spot right now. You're right, something is wrong. Give me like 15, 20 minutes, or, I just need some time alone. Does that make sense? Right, so part of communication is our listening. Just our listening and our vulnerability. What do we got for questions? Actually, sorry, Abuna, let's have anything?
Are you sure you're ready for this, Robert?
You want me to read it?
I'll read it. All right, here we go. The first question goes, and I'm assuming that says 20-year-old male, under the guidance of my father of confession, have been told that it's not a bad idea to take a step back, regain my composure, and then go back to discuss the situation in and out of relationships. My girlfriend 20, female, has taken note of that and doesn't appreciate that I go MIA and has proposed that I put a time limit on how long I can to calm down. Your thoughts? Imagine this is referencing the time to kind of take
To
back
cool
and
down.
reflect. Like the cool down. What's an appropriate time for a cool down?
Okay, so the cooling down period, I think there's two ways that it can be used. There could be a way, the first way that it's used is the appropriate way, which is for me to kind of calm down enough, gather my thoughts, and be able to have a conversation without saying something I regret or without becoming emotionally disrupted. The other way that it can be used is to punish the other person. Because if I refuse conversation with that person, essentially what I'm doing is giving them the cold shoulder. I'm not really cooling it's no cooling off period. It's, no, I'm gonna punish you and let you know that I wasn't happy about what happened, and I'm completely fine watching you get really upset about what happened, and that in itself is helping me cool down. That's not appropriate. And so I think, what do you think, a day or two at most?
Yeah.
I'd say probably about a day or two at most for the cooling off period. And that's for a significant fight.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be longer than that.
I would say you can't weaponize that.
No.
That is a big red flag, because you have to be honest with yourself. If you're the person that's constantly having to cool down, then are you using it as a tool to punish your significant other? And if you are, then why? You have to kind of unpack those issues and try to figure out why you're doing that. It should only, and you can't use it consistently. It can't be all the time. There has to come to a point where you guys need to have fruitful discussions and resolve, whatever's going on with you guys. I don't know. Hopefully that answers that.
When should a couple seek advice from an abuna, and how often?
Yeah, I think if you're getting to know someone, you've gone on the first hey, I'm getting to know this person, and it's been now 3 dates or so, and you're thinking, okay, this person might be someone that I'm actually thinking about having a serious relationship with, then you should talk to your father of confession, number one. She should talk to her father of confession, number two. And then at some point, it's going to differ from couple to couple, but once you're starting to think, okay, this is getting be pretty serious, then you should sit with Abuna together. Abuna can offer guidance in terms of when that can happen, because Abuna is going to know you on an individual basis, and that might differ from person to person. And so Abuna's advice to me might be different than Abuna's advice to Paul, than to Philo, who he might say just go to the monastery. It's going to differ. And so, but I would say don't be in a relationship for 6 months, a year before you decide to tell your father of confession. It should be by 3 dates in, you should know whether this person is going to be a good fit or not, and whether you're going to continue seeing this person or not. And that's when you should tell Abuna.
I'd also add to that, you should also even see your father confession post-marriage. Don't let it just be kind of a premarital thing in the sense that we only see him for his advice of kind of who my partner is, but it also helps because as your relationship progresses, he's going to find ways that you may not be visibly seeing to kind of further progress your life, at least in your relationship together as one or together with Christ, or you may see things that you may not need work on that they may see, and progressing from there. How do you communicate a jealousy concern where your partner does not see a reason to why there is a concern in the first place?
Did you say jealousy specifically?
Jealousy specifically, yeah.
It depends, because you could have someone who's over I don't want to say overprotective, but extremely, if he sees that the person that he's interested in is talking to another guy, then all of a sudden he feels no, this is not acceptable, blah blah blah. But then you also can have the opposite of that, where you have a girl who is very flirtatious and she's talking to someone, but she's also being flirtatious with another guy. So one of those is completely inappropriate. The other one is also completely inappropriate. And so it's a case-by-case basis. It's not, I wish I had a specific example, you know what I mean? Because that would make it a little bit easier. But I would say, again, this is a situation where you would bounce bounce the situation off of your father of confession or off of someone who's older and say, should I feel like this in this particular situation? no, you should have this conversation with this person and they should be able to see it this way. Or they might say, no, that your reading of the situation is not right. It's wrong. She should be able to say hi to other people that are attending the Bible study.
All right, next question. I've come to notice that over time, I've had to repeat multiple things to my significant other when similar/same topics come up. This often gets on my nerves because it makes me feel like she doesn't believe me and is insecure. My S/O, significant other, likes to bring up. I'm reading it as is. My terrible interpretation, forgive me. My significant other likes to bring up things from the past multiple times despite being under the impression that specific issues was properly addressed on both sides and laid to rest. Do you have any tips to help? I know this is a very long question. The idea of
Bringing things up,
the idea of multiple topics being brought up over and over again in a relationship that may not have been resolved from the first time.
so people can only, sacrifice can only go so far. So, I mean, what I mean by that is, I have limits to how much I want to sacrifice in a relationship. And so there's something maybe that I'm doing that I won't give up, or that I don't want to give up in order to make the other person happy. And maybe that upsets the other person, and it keeps coming up, and it's something that I can't let go of. Then I need to figure out whether or not, is this worth maybe risking the relationship if I continue this behavior? And the other person, the person who is on the other end of this, has to put up with the person, doing the behavior over and over again, I think has to consider, maybe this is something that the other my significant other won't give up. Am I able to put up with whatever this may be for the sake of the relationship to stay with them? It's again, yes, it's calculate the cost that Robert was saying earlier. And then the second part. Bringing things up from the past. Once something's been in the past and it's been resolved and you have agreed that it has been resolved, it should not be, again, weaponized and brought up in further communications, unless it's the same issue that's occurring. But then, if that's the case, then it is something that is not, resolved and it's not in the past. So it should only be brought up if it's a continuing issue, or if it's like something that is directly related to it. Otherwise, you cannot torture the person that you're with, and it's the idea of, number one, forgiveness and forgetting. That once you've forgiven someone for something, you shouldn't be bringing it up again. That's not healthy.
I think this is something that we might need to deal as an acceptance with a feature in the S/O, that he or she is representing themselves this way. So it's me to accept or deal with or reject. So I need to understand that this is a feature, that I'm bringing up things that I thought that it'd been laid down, but it's not. So it's a feature, a characteristic in the significant other that I need either to accept or to say bye-bye.
Next question. What if the addiction was in the past and you've repented and confessed? Do you still need to share them?
Yes. In my opinion, I think it's going to differ from person to person. I think you should, and the reason why, the problem with addictions is there are always areas of weaknesses in your life. That means at any point, if something happens where there is a period of weakness in your life, sometimes you can go back to that same addiction. And so if the person that you're with, you've explained the situation to them, I'm sure they love you, and I'm sure they're gonna be there for you. But it's good for them to be able to hold you accountable, so that if they see you struggling through a period of your life, they can check in on you and say, hey, how's it going with this particular issue? Are you feeling any difficulty? Because what can happen sometimes is, sometimes we like to lie to ourselves. Nobody wants to admit that they have any addiction, because addictions, it has its own stigma that comes with it. And so we like to say we've moved past it, we've moved beyond it, but then we face difficulty in our life, we get weak, and sometimes we can fall into the same issue that we had before. And if that issue was hidden from our spouse, that makes it even more difficult, and a huge part of addiction is shame. And so if it's hidden from the spouse and you fall into it and you've never told them about it from before, now you take the shame of addiction and you add to that the shame of hiding it from your spouse and the shame of this and that, and it just makes the whole situation worse. So I think it's better to just say, hey, this is a weakness that I've had before. I've discussed this with my father of confession. This is the last day I did so-and-so, or the last year, or whatever month, whatever. And I'm just letting you know, so that I can have full transparency with you. I trust you with my life. Obviously, I can trust you with this. That's my opinion. I think everybody can differ. Maybe, obviously your father of confession might have a different opinion on that. I'm sharing with mine. It's not gospel truth. It's just Robert Beshai opinion.
How do you communicate with someone who doesn't allow others to know their emotional state or refuses to communicate in the first place?
I don't think you can. If they're not willing to communicate with you, there's only so much you can do. If this is a friend of yours or a significant other or whatever, you can do your best to try and communicate, maybe try and pull them out of, bring some guards down, bring some walls down, and maybe that'll take some vulnerability on your part, so that they can feel like they're in a, and I hate this word, but safe space, but so they can feel like they're in an environment where you can be trusted. But if someone's not willing to communicate, you can't force them to, unfortunately.
Can service be considered an addiction that could potentially ruin a relationship? Serving at churches every day, sometimes all day. Abuna?
It's time for confession, Abuna.
Yes, actually it can. It can be considered that. Because, ready? So I'll give you an example. And I remember I heard this a long time ago, actually, right? So let's say you have, let's say prayer. Prayer is very good, right? Can anyone say that prayer is bad? Okay. So let's say I'm married and you have kids, right? I mean, I am married and I have kids, but let's pretend you're married and you have kids, okay? But let's say all you do is go inside your room and you pray. Are you doing yourself any good? Probably yourself, right? What about your significant other, or your husband or your wife? Are you fulfilling your role for them? What about your kids that you're supposed to be raising? Okay, so there, in everything in life, in everything, right? There has to be a balance. There has to be a balance, right? And so when you get married, you are responsible for your spouse. And there will be sacrifices, and some greater than others, but you have to balance that. There has to be a balance. There has to be a balance.
If you see a red flag in a person, should you walk away or try to work it out? Whatever that red flag may mean.
I think, again, this is all about calculating the cost. So if you feel like this red flag, yeah, it's a significant red flag, but aside from that, this person is a wonderful person, and this person's willing to work on that, and they're really serious about it, it's not just lip service, yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea. But if it's a serious red flag, the person might be willing to work on it, but that's just too much for you. Might walk away. Or you're willing to stay, but this person's not willing to work on that. You walk away. So it just, again, a lot of it kind of depends on the individual situation, the individual you're dealing with. Are they willing to work on it or not? Is the person worth it or not? That's the whole calculating the cost. This is where you have to depend on the wisdom of people like of your father of confession. Your parents, do not underestimate your parents. Do not underestimate. They give you good advice. And also older servants that might be married, if you don't feel comfortable discussing it with your parents or whatever. A lot of times they will give you good advice too.
The next question relates a little bit to this, but how do you calculate the cost? How do you account for unknown behaviors?
Hold on. Who knows?
Oh,
Something behind me.
Might be a personal opinion, but relationship and marriage is not a service event. Okay? So it's not that I'm serving someone by being in a relationship with. Okay? So if there is a red flag, it is a red flag. We shouldn't discount it. Okay?
Yes, I think Peter called it missionary dating last time.
The follow-up question was with regards to then the unknown factors of red flags or unknown red flags that you've not encountered. How do you calculate that cost?
So you don't, okay, if I want to make sure I understand it correctly. So you're saying if you don't know about the red flags, how do you calculate the cost?
It says, you said to calculate the cost. How do you account for unknown behaviors or unknown red flags?
You can't. That's the problem. That's the problem. You can't. You're asked to solve a math equation, but you don't have all the parts of the equation that you need, so you can't. Yes?
So I'm not sure if this is what the person is getting at, but what about, I think they might be saying, like, you know someone has an issue with XYZ, but you don't know how it's going to be to live with XYZ until you're married. So how do you kind of calculate that ahead of time?
Okay, so the question is, okay, so you know that this person is dealing with X, Y, and Z. You have no experience in dealing with X, Y, and Z, and so you have no idea of how to calculate the cost of living with a person dealing with X, Y, and Z. Is that right? Am I understanding it right? Okay. I think, again, the best thing to do when it comes to, anytime you're faced with a situation where you don't know the answer, or you don't know, like, you've never been in that position before, is you go to talk to people that have been, right? And sometimes older people will be really useful for that, in the sense that either they've been through it themselves or they have a friend that went through it, and they might not give you the answer of, yeah, no, go ahead and definitely do it, or don't do it, but they might say, look, I had a friend who went through something similar, and this is what they faced, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, if you ask friends that are your age who have never been married, they cannot give you that kind of information. Again, Abuna is an excellent resource because our priests have to a lot of times be marriage counselors in a sense. And so he can tell you, well, you know, I knew of a couple that went through the same thing, and this was the struggle that they faced. So you have to make a decision whether this is going to be something that you can handle or not. And they can tell you like the unseen costs, so to speak, and also the unseen rewards. That would be the way that I would answer that. Do you have anything you want to add? Abuna, do you want to add anything to that? Does that answer your question?
I think it's important to realize that a lot of the questions you guys have, there isn't really any defined or finite kind of line of, you know, keep them or drop them. I think we're looking for this kind of, is it a go or is it a no? Fortunately, it's a process of developing who you are, and with God's grace and Abuna's guidance and whoever's you're looking to help guide you to where you can be, and hopefully with God's grace, get you to be in a better place with them. And this will help kind of develop who you are as a person and get you to the next level in that relationship. The next question is, should the person you're dating be the closest person to you and you to them? And I'm guessing into this question, this also means like foregoing friends outside the relationship and having close friends and them being the only one.
I don't know if you want to answer this one. It's hard to say because dating or, courting, if you're courting and you're doing it for the purpose of trying to, see if this person is worthy to be married or, a good partner for you, then you do want to spend a good amount of time trying to figure that out. And if you put your friends, for example, or, other people in front of someone that you're seriously dating, that's a red flag. Because this person ultimately will be your number one or should be your number one in your life. So you do have to kind of make a commitment and you sacrifice other things when you are seriously dating somebody. If you are casually dating somebody, I don't recommend that. I don't recommend you guys casually dating anybody. There's no such thing as casual dating because number one, you're wasting your time. Number two, you are putting yourself, as basically like a big walking target for the devil to tempt you into things that you would not, otherwise, be tempted to do if you weren't casually dating other people. So I would say if you are seriously considering somebody for marriage, you should be making them a priority. They should be a priority over the other people in your life. And it has to be after you're married that they are your number one priority.
Just to add to that, right? So the other side to that is if you're dating, right? So one thing that I always say is you're not married till you're married, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are dating someone and then you just cut everyone out, you run the risk of if the relationship doesn't work, then that's a really awkward situation, right? Because you're kind of just by yourself. But so it just healthy boundaries. Yes, they should be a priority, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't see or hang out with anybody else ever.
Yes.
They're still your friends, so you should healthy boundaries.
Next question, we have a few more minutes or more questions. When my patience is becoming extremely weak with my partner, and it shakes up my perception on the relationship, but I know this person is good for me, how do I stop losing my patience so easily? Seems like a self-control question. I'm bad at that. Terrible at that.
I think it requires a lot of self-awareness as to why I might be losing my patience. It's losing your patience to, what was the question? You find yourself losing your patience because, but this person is good for you. I think you just work on it. I don't know.
I think part of it is understanding why you're losing your patience with this person. Usually, again, this comes back to effective communication. Some of it has to do with maybe you have needs. Maybe you have needs that are not being met. Maybe you've had discussions about things that you need from this person, and maybe this person is a servaholic where he goes to the service all the time, and maybe, yes, that's nice, and you said they're good for you, and they're good for you because they go to church, he's a deacon, he loves God, etc. But at the same time, you might have certain needs in the relationship that are not being met, and that's what's causing you to be frustrated. In that situation, it's okay for you to be frustrated because you have certain needs that are not being met. So again, it really comes down to what is the source of your frustration. I think if you figure that out, you'll have a better idea of why you're losing your patience. And then again, discussion, not only with this person, but with somebody who has a little bit more wisdom.
These next few questions kind of bundle up a little bit. They deal with vulnerability. So as you mentioned that we have to be vulnerable in front of our partners, but not share past experiences such as old relationships, which our church advises us to do. However, this contradicts with being vulnerable with our partners, and it can hurt us back. It says hunt us back, I'm guessing hurt us back. Also, I had a past experience with my ex where she disclosed past experiences later, and then I felt I was deceived because of her history, and it ended up with our breakup apparently. And how do you overcome this issue of being vulnerable? If it's difficult.
Being what?
Vulnerable or difficult.
Well, I do think that you need to share your past relationships, especially serious ones, with the person that you will marry, especially because sometimes you will date people from from within the community. And let's say, for example, you were in a serious relationship with someone from the community, no one knew about it, and then now you guys are married, and now you guys go to church, and all of a sudden somehow it comes up that, oh, she happened to date so-and-so, who also happens to be like a friend of yours, but he had no idea that you guys had this serious relationship. That can make for very awkward interactions and make for feelings of betrayal and, well, why didn't you tell me, etc. It's better to just be honest and open about this stuff. In my opinion, I know that there are fathers of confessions who have said, no, what's happened in the past stays in the past, you don't discuss it. That's another opinion. My personal opinion is it's better to be open about these things, but with wisdom, choose the right time. You might, the person who's asking the question said he was dating someone or getting to know someone, they expressed they expressed previous relationships, and he felt like he couldn't continue because of the history of this person. You know, honestly, it's better to find out the history that you weren't happy with before than finding it out after the fact that you're married, and then you're not happy, but you're stuck at that point.
A couple more questions and we'll kind of cut it here. How important are the future in-laws? When do I know when it's a red flag with the in-laws?
We live 4 houses down from my parents.
Yeah.
Carefully.
I love my in-laws. I will preface this with I love them dearly. I mean, in our relationship, we're fortunate to live very close to our families. We live 4 houses down from Robert's parents, and we live about half an hour away from my family, and so we see them quite often. And I think because if you're going to be around them a lot and you want to incorporate them into your family, remember these will ultimately be the grandparents and the aunts and uncles of your children, and family is good. You want to have a healthy family environment. You want to raise kids in that. You want to bring a spouse into that. And I understand that not everybody comes from a healthy family environment as we speak. And so it depends. It depends on, these are, again, important conversations to have prior to marriage. If you sense that, family is going to be an issue, you can set boundaries with family. You can be as open, you can have an open family. Like, luckily, thank God, I feel like, we have a good family. We're very, very close to our in-laws, and that just works for us. And I understand that that's not going to be the same for everybody. And so, you just have to be very open and very. You have to express your concerns with your partner, and set boundaries.
The only thing that I would add to that, except for in rare situations, when you marry someone, you're marrying their entire family. That's just a fact. Because they're going to be in your life whether you want them to be or not. They're part of who your spouse is. So when you marry someone, except for, again, in rare situations, when you marry someone, you are marrying the entire family. So calculate the cost carefully.
All right, I'm going to combine this last question, at least a couple of them together. They're kind of all very similar. How different or similar should you be to your partner in relation to also having to advise your partner that they need to work more on being emotionally intellectual or socially intellectual without hurting them? And in doing so, is it okay to maintain a relationship then with another best friend of the opposite sex?
I'll answer the second one. It is never okay to be a best friend or even a close friend with a person of the opposite sex. You guys are going to look at me and think I'm archaic. Believe me, this is wisdom that is millennia old.
What's the first part of the question?
With relation to being how similar or different or close should you be with your partner in relation to them if you find any issues and you want to advise on being more intellectual or emotionally?
I think you should have the same fundamental foundation. So I think you need to be on the same page, spiritually. You might not be at the same spiritual levels or whatever, but you have to have the same spiritual understanding, number one. because that's going to come up a lot, especially when you have kids and you want to, rear them in the church. Number two, I would say ideology-wise, like same politically minded, it's just a lot more cohesive when you're on the same page because you're going to be starting a family together, and so you want to make sure that you're not going to have like opposing ideas. You're not going to be at war with each other when it comes to raising your kids. You're trying to make this as easy as possible for you. And it's not going to be like that on all levels. You're going to have your differences, you're going to have your preferences and certain things. But the fundamentals you need to be on the same page. And as far as trying to get somebody to be more socially or intellectually mature.
Without hurting their feelings, how do you advise them?
Maybe encourage them to be in certain situations, or to read certain books, or or listen to a certain podcast or a sermon or something. Maybe something that interests you. If you're trying to get them to like something that you like, or be a part of something that you're a part of, then maybe introduce them to those things.
I would add one thing. You can tell that this question was written by a girl. The reason why is because guys never ask the question about whether they can be best friends with the person of the opposite sex, because guys kind of know better than that, in the sense it is, because they know the potential of where that can go.
No, but we're gonna have an argument.
Yes, this is communication, guys. Watch this. No. That what I'm saying by that, in general, girls are more willing to give guys the benefit of the doubt in terms of how platonic the relationship is. Whereas guys, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, understand that there's always going to be the potential that friendship leads to something else. And a lot of times, that's why they are in that friendship, with the hope of it turning into something else. Whereas a lot of times the girls are in that friendship for the sake of the platonic relationship within that friendship. I think Peter touched on that last time in his talk about when they surveyed the guys who are in the relationship, what's the chances that the girl is attracted to you, and it's significantly higher than when the girls are asked the same question. And then the other thing is, guys generally tend to be a little bit more emotionally immature, and that's why I think a girl asked that question. Guys do not like having conversations about emotions, so it's going to be difficult. That's why I bring that up. It's going to be hard to talk to somebody about emotional maturity, or talk to guys about emotional maturity. We feel funny about talking about it, not all of us, but a lot of us do. And so that the best way to do that is to just have conversations about it without bringing it up like, we need to talk about this. It's just more of like, hey, and then you just get into it. You just start talking about emotions and what his thoughts are about emotions, and etc. Okay, well, what are your thoughts about this particular situation? And that's interesting. Why do you feel this way? The best way to have a conversation and try to get someone to agree to your what you're trying to say, or the best way to convey something to someone, is ask them questions that lead them in a particular direction that you want them to go, because they're willing to have a conversation with you that way. But if you tell them, tell me about your thoughts about feelings and hurt feelings, and how come we're not vulnerable with each other, he's going to want to hang himself. It's just guys don't like those conversations. But if you present him with the situation, say, hey, I read this on the internet today, and it was a situation where this and this happened between this couple. What do you think about it? He'll happily share his ideas, and that way you're getting him to think on an emotional level.
Thank you, Robert and Dena, so much for your time. I know you took the time away from your kids. Thank you guys for showing up. I'm very happy to see all you guys here again. This is probably, I think, the most we've had for a turnout, thank God. And next week, we have George and Cindy Basilios, who will be talking about boundaries with relationships. Same bat time, same bat channel. Otherwise,
Just one last announcement. GYP, for those that I think are 25 to 35, April 8th through 10th. Father Anthony Paul is going to speak on Pope Carlos, a man of prayer. Trying to find the website. I like Cops GYP. It's a great website. Very intuitive. That's it. Pray for us. Any college graduate can come. There you go.
In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. God, we thank you. We thank you that you are always in the midst. We thank you for your guidance. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your uniting with us in the Holy Eucharist, allowing us to unite with you, eating your body and drinking your blood. We thank you that you are hosting us in your holy bosom, in your holy church, to examine the oneness in you and to get ready for a happy life and happy church to be established in our future homes. We thank you that you are allowed us to be raised in you, to represent you and to give glory to your holy name. We thank you for all the love and the care of our brothers and the sisters who you guided them to prepare this, and you are guiding and protecting and providing. We thank you, God, for the journey of the Lent. We thank you that you are giving us this opportunity to grow in you and to get rid of anything that we can get rid of, anything that's not pleasing you. Even if we lived a prodigal life, even if we had bad choices, even if we stayed lonely, even if we are blind, you are able to give us enlightenment and to give us sight to witness you and to witness to you. We thank you, Lord, for the church, for the fathers, for the servants, for the brothers, for the sisters, for this holy life that you are providing to us. We thank you that you are accepting the prayer of the Holy Theotokos, St. Mary, Archangel Michael, St. Mark, and all the saints. And we thank you that you are accepting our prayers when we pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Through Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Abuna Kiro. Abi.
In the name of the Holy Spirit, be with you. Those who should depart in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you.
Guys, I'm so glad seeing you all and waiting to see you next week. Thomas.